Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to another online seminar organized by the Centre of Language Education Research at Queen's University Belfast. My name is Dr. Sin Wang Chong. I'm a lecturer in TESOL here at Queen's, and I'm also one of the members in the Research Centre. And for today's seminar, we're very, very pleased to have Professor Joel Mynard to speak to us on the topic supporting learners outside the language classroom, theory and practice. Before I introduce Professor Mynard, I would like to just remind all of you that this session will be recorded. And I have already, when you accept the invitation, there is a statement saying that you have given consent to this to be recorded. If you have any problem with this, just drop me a text if this is a problem. Just some housekeeping. During the talk, I think Joe would have questions for everyone. So if you have any comments or reflections or questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring them, reading them out loud. At the very end of our the talk, as usual, we'll have a pretty extended period for discussion and interaction. If you would like to say something, can you please use the raise hand button, and then one of our colleagues will invite you to speak. I'm very excited today because this seminar has gathered a lot of interest. We had over 200 people registered for this talk. So it's a topic clearly people are very, very interested in. So before we start, I would just like to introduce the speaker today, Professor Joel Mynard. Professor Mynard is a professor and director of the SelfAccess Learning Centre and director of the Research Institute for for Learner Autonomy Education at Kanda University of International Studies in Japan. She has co-edited and co-authored several books in the areas of advising, learner autonomy, and social learning spaces. She is one of the founding editors of the journal Studies in Self-Access Learning, Relay Journal, and a journal for the psychology of language learning. So today we're very happy to have Professor Mynard with us. So Joe, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Such an honor, and I'm really thrilled that so many people are interested in self-access. You know, I think it's got a bit of a stuffy image, you know, a little old-fashioned image, but hopefully we'll put that old stuffy image to bed today if you've got any doubts at all. So anyway, thank you for coming. I had a bit of problem with my slides. You'd think we'd all be experts at online teaching by now, but anyway, Ivan's kindly going to change my slides for me. So please go to the next one and we'll do an overview of the talk. So this is, so I've got 5 points. And because really I don't want to hear the sound of my voice for any longer than I have to, I'm going to pause regularly and we're going to do a summary after each section, and that will give you a chance to sort of think and ask some questions and things like that. Okay, so part 1 is, you know, why supporting learning outside the classroom? Why are we interested in that today? Point 2, let's look at what self-access language learning is. Okay, modern self-access language learning. And then we'll look at basic psychological needs theory a little bit, and we'll look at really briefly self-determination theory and how that supports well-being in self-access learning. So it's a bit of a new direction for self-access. And then we'll look at our roles as educators, teachers, and particularly learning advisors, and the role of advising. And then finally, we'll look at some examples of how these components of self-access language learning can support students' basic psychological needs. Okay, so yeah, I have some warm-up questions for you. I can't help myself really. This is going to help me, I guess, to get a sense of who's interested, who's here, and you know, what kind of information you might be interested in. So could you type into the chat, what's your current knowledge about self-access language learning? Would you say you have a good understanding? Put A. some understanding, B, or C, you're a beginner, you don't know much about it. So if you can put A, B, or C, that will really help me. Okay, C, B, 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 A, okay. All right. Okay, I'm really happy about that. Thank you very much. And I've got another warm-up question for you as well. If you go to the next slide. So what do you hope to get out of this session? You know, if you like, you can just think to yourself, this is something we'll return to at the end of the talk to see if you got it. And if not, you know, that's the chance then in the Q&A and discussion to explore a bit more deeply. But maybe you can think to yourself, what do you hope to get out of this session? If you feel like sharing, that would be nice too. So if you want to give me some direction, if you like, might help me to think about what to focus on. So an overview of self-access and best practice. Okay. I'm glad you said that, Angela, because that's kind of what I had planned. So that's great. I mean, things might occur to you as we go along, of course. So well-being and language learning. Okay. How students can make good use of it. Okay, learning to help language learners. Great technique strategies, better understanding, updated research insights. Okay. Okay. Is it? Yeah, so some people might be looking to introduce self-access learning in their own institutions. Okay. Okay, great. This is really helpful. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, there's no way I'm going to answer all of these things, but I'll do my best to focus on quite a few of them, actually. And if not, we can come back to them in the discussion. Okay, thank you. All right, let's go on to the next one then. So part one is, this is really quick. I just want to contextualize it because I think a lot of language educators are interested in what happens in the classroom and in teaching, but I've taken a sort of different turn in my career. I'm interested in how we can support learners outside the classroom, and maybe just a little bit of support for that. So the next slide. So in fact, we could argue that most learning does take place outside the classroom already. It's just we haven't researched it enough. Most of the research in our field has been based on classroom learning, probably because it's easier to do. You know, you've got a group of learners and you might have them for a whole semester, and you can see whether your classroom interventions are working or not and things like that. Whereas if you're dealing with learners outside the classroom, they could be doing anything, anywhere. So actually pinning that down is a bit more tricky, isn't it? So that's part of the reason why. They could be doing so many things, and they do, of course. And now learning opportunities and environments have expanded a lot in recent years. So there are so many more opportunities for students to take advantage of. So I'm kind of interested in that, you know, what do students do outside the classroom and how can we support that? Can we support it, or are they on their own? Next one. And so I'm coming at it from an ecological perspective. So I'm not really looking at it like what happens in class about, you know, versus what happens outside class. I like to see it as a sort of, you know, it's a whole ecology. It's not really a dichotomy. There are multiple environments that are available for language learning. And I'm interested in looking at how we can support learners as part of their ongoing lifelong learning. Okay. Next one. So here's another question for you to think about. So ideally, what kind of support would you like to be available to your language learners outside the classroom? What kind of things do you think would benefit them? You can just think to yourself, make a note or mental notes, or share if you like. Think about group of learners you're working with. What would you like? What kind of support? So I mean, this is different from opportunities. I think any student can make opportunities for themselves, for example, online, but what kind of support would you like them to have? Okay, thanks for sharing. So things like peer learning, promoting autonomy, communities, excellent. Yeah, and those are the kind of things that we can help with, aren't they? They're not necessarily just naturally there, but sometimes they do need a little organizing. Okay, well, thanks for sharing. Let's go to the next one. So I think the sort of things that you've described, I would say that would come under the umbrella of self-access language learning, definitely. Maybe traditionally it didn't, and we'll have a look. We'll go back in time in a minute to see what self-access used to mean. But in my view, it does support the kinds of things that you've been sharing in the chat. So this is where I work, and I've been running around this place all day. This picture was taken pre-COVID, and today I must say it looked fairly similar with the addition of screens and masks and a bit more distance, but pretty much looked like this today. And it's yeah, it's called the SALK. This is it. And often SALK start off as very modest projects with some keen teachers, not me. This was my predecessor, Lucy Cooker, lobbied the university to give them some space so that they could have some way to support students outside the classroom. So the second version was a much larger centre, and we outgrew that. And in 2017, we opened this one. So the focus here is more on social processes. As you can see, it's enormous, and there are so many things going on. So let's have a little look inside. Next one, please. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so here are some of the things. We'll look at a few more in a bit more detail. So as you might expect, there are learning resources, spaces for students to work together and even socialize, have lunch while they're practicing speaking, for instance, in this case. There's a drop-in desk and advising service. We have 13 full-time advisors working there. So our job is to be in the centre all day or teaching courses related to self-directed learning, learner autonomy. Lots of ways to help students develop strategies and awareness for language learning, such as these sheets, websites and things like that, and places for students to work on projects as well. So this is just a little taste of some of the things inside. Yes, this is this question, Angela, thanks. Yeah, we also have a writing centre and a speaking centre, I suppose. Yeah, and peer learning groups. I'll talk more about peer or the learning communities a bit later, but we have peer advisors as well as professional educators who are working as learning advisors. Okay, next one. So this is how we define our SelfAccess Centre. So it's a person-centred social learning environment that actively promotes language learner autonomy, both within and outside the space. And traditionally, we defined learner autonomy from, using the literature that's kind of 50 years old now, the language learner autonomy. So basically, broadly, it just means taking charge of your own language learning or taking charge of your learning. Okay, knowing how to learn and actually acting on that. So that's the definition we use for many years. But for the past few years, we've started reading more about psychology and looking at different studies in self-determination theory. So our definition of autonomy is definitely being influenced by different fields. But for now, let's just keep it as traditionally we've talked about how to help students take charge of their own learning. Okay, that's our centre. And just to take you back in time a little bit, so the field has been around since probably the late 60s or early 70s. There are some early centres in Europe. And the focus originally was on personalised learning in adult education, actually originally. So for instance, there were adult education courses in languages, and students couldn't possibly get everything they needed in just a couple of classes a week. And so a self-access centre was established so students could fill the gap between what they needed and what they weren't getting in class. So the focus was on personalising what you needed and working on sort of your individual weaknesses, probably working alone. And the focus tended to be on grammatical accuracy. Okay, so what happened? The field has developed since that time. So there's been several shifts over the decades. I've given these names to the sort of phases or trend. They reflect the trends at the time in language teaching in general, I guess. But what happens is that each phase has been added on to this like really multifaceted ecosystem of learning that you can see in a SALK. So in addition to supporting language learning, more recent versions support, affective, social needs and psychological needs as well. So it's become more about the learner rather than the language over the years. So in the 80s, we saw communicative language learning featured in SALK. So there would be the focus on communicative tasks. And we saw a lot of audio and visual materials, video materials. And then project-based learning in the 90s. So it was very group-oriented in many ways. There were more authentic texts. We started to get a lot of computer programs, computer drills and quizzes. In the 2000s, I call it computer-assisted learning. Even though there were computers in the 90s, it became more about communication-based technology. And teachers were making websites specifically for learners, and learners were starting to make their own as well. In the 2010s, we saw this was a big shift actually towards social and mobile learning. So everybody started getting their own devices. So whereas traditionally you might have to go to a SelfAccess Centre to get magazines, books and the different things that you needed, everyone could get those from their own device. And so SALK started to reinvent themselves to become more social spaces. So we wanted to still bring people in and benefit from having a social learning experience rather than just this, may as well be in the 1970s, the personalized learning system again, if you're just going to use your phone and study alone. And then more recently, and this is quite new, and I'm talking about this in this today, but to be honest, I am still working on these ideas. So I can see from what I've noticed, talking to educators, people who work in classrooms and outside, anyone who's interested in supporting learners outside the classroom, we're a lot more interested in emotions and how to support the whole learner. So we're focusing on how do we create conditions to help people to thrive. And we're going to look a little bit in a while at self-determination theory and basic psychological needs theory. So the basic psychological needs of competence, autonomy, and relatedness, and how we can get people to draw on their inner motivational resources to help them to thrive and grow and to enjoy and have a really worthwhile learning experience as they learn languages. So this is the phase I think we're going in, and it's very interesting, isn't it? Let's go to the next one. Okay, so just to back up a bit, evaluating a SALK, traditionally you would sort of look at these kind of things, does the SALK have a philosophy? What are the goals of the SALK and how are they achieving it? What resources are available? What facilities does it have? What access do we have to learning communities? What support is given to students? And is there a chance for innovation? Will the SALK grow or will it just stagnate? So these are sort of 6 things that you could look at if you're evaluating your own SALK or you're considering creating one, for instance. And it's not a bad way to go. And I have an activity, but I'm not sure if it'll work all that well. But maybe we'll go to the next slide and I'll explain what it is anyway. Basically, it's a checklist, and the slides are available. I'll share the link and the QR code again at the end, and you can link to this your document yourself. Maybe that's easier. But basically, this could be used as a checklist. Are these things available for my learners? But what would be better is if you personalize your checklist, of course, thinking about the needs of the students. It's a little bit generic, but it might be a good starting point. So I used this as in order to make a typology of SALKs, which I'll show you on the next page. And from this, you can maybe identify where your SALK fits. So a type 1 or social supportive SALK, would probably have all of these things. So it would have a philosophy and a commitment to promoting language learner autonomy, for instance. It would be well stocked with relevant materials for the learner population. Not just language learning materials, but ones of general interest as well. It would have, furniture and rooms and equipment that allow students to work in different ways. Whereas a type 2, a developing SALK, might not have much of a budget, but would have probably staffed by or probably volunteers, very usually keen students and teachers who have started it as a project, like our SALK started actually, You just, you take over a classroom or two, and you take it from there. And then a type 3, I've called it an administrative centre. So for whatever reason, this place usually doesn't have much of philosophy. It's often all about the building. It's usually more like a library. Often it's well funded. They've got good resources, and the building's often very beautiful. But it doesn't necessarily have, the philosophy for promoting autonomy, for instance. So it doesn't necessarily have the staff. Let's go to the next page. This is the rest of the checklist, or the typology. And I think in a type 1 SALK, you'd expect to see communities like learners helping other learners, supporting other learners, and opportunities for learners to take charge and things like that. And you would see a lot of support as well. So definitely full-time learning advisors and or teachers working in the space, usually a help desk of some sort, and staff, administrative staff. Whereas in a type 2 SALK, you might not see those things, usually because of budget. You might not see the support because there are no full-time staff. But often the people themselves involved create the communities and the learning opportunities. So I've seen some really wonderful SALKs that are run on very low budgets, but where groups of students have taken over, that kind of thing. And a type 3 SALK, you would almost certainly not see any of this. You might get an information counter. It's more like a library, I suppose. And I've seen SALKs move between one to the other. So it's quite common that a type 2 SALK can become a type 1 SALK if the university or the institution provides the budget, or like we did in the early days, we applied for a grant and got it. So we were able to upgrade our facilities and so on, and hire full-time staff. So we move from a type 2 to a type 1. But often what happens is when you've got a type 1 SALK, it's very slick. You've got systems and administrative support and everything. And I work in such a space, and I know I'm really lucky. But sometimes the freedom, for innovation can be a bit limited because you're part of the structure of an institution. So any decision making has to go through levels of committees and so on. Whereas if you're in a type 2 SALK, usually you're operating kind of outside the usual university guidelines. These people are volunteers, and they can really create and innovate. So I've seen really special things happen in a type 2 SALK. Type 3, almost you don't really see research or innovation. It's usually the building is created, it looks beautiful, and they just keep it as it is for a while. Okay, so this is what I've noticed in Japan. I mean, I admit I haven't done this kind of study internationally, and actually I would love to. This is something I plan to do in the near future. So, by the way, I am sharing, if you look at the slides later, there is a link to the checklist, so you can see it. Share the link in the chat. I might be able to do that. Let's see. I probably have it open, yeah. Somewhere. Sorry, too many things going on. Okay, did that work? Yes. I mean, the checklist is just a version of this typology. And this was published as a chapter in a book about Japan, actually. Okay. So shall we move on? So what I think we've seen from this is that there's definitely a move towards social processes. And I hope you're following why this has happened. So we've moved from the individual to, communicative and task-based. And so now and then we went into sort of mobile, and then maybe a little bit individualistic again. And now we're back to more of a focus on social. Let's look at what's happening next then. Can we move to the next one? Okay. Oh, I'm taking you back in time. Yes, sorry. These are just a series of pictures just to show how far we've come, I think. There's definitely not much in the way of social processes going on here, is there? This is Nottingham in the 1960s. Okay, let's have the next one. So this is Boston in the 1980s. So again, everyone's in their little boxes. I don't think there's much social processes or social interaction going on here. I have a hunch that these students are working on something that the teacher has told them to work on as well. So there's probably very little choice involved. Look, they all seem to have the same worksheet, so I think they're all doing the same thing. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so this one's beautiful, isn't it? So it's University of Leeds. I'd love to visit. I don't know if anyone's from Leeds here. But this is, you know, this is much more of what we see in modern centres. A lot more open. Students are allowed to talk to each other and probably choose what they're working on as well. And it's a place you would actually want to go to, isn't it? Not like one of these boxes where you probably are forced to go. Okay, next one. Next picture, please. Okay, and this is Sojo University in Kumamoto in Japan. And this is interesting because, look, the computers have gone now because this was just taken a few years ago. And I think this picture is quite staged, but it's not, it's something you would normally see, actually. So either students bring their own devices, or in Japan, actually, they quite like books as well. They quite like the traditional materials. So instead, there's lots of space for students to get together to do this and bring what they need. Okay, next one. And yeah, of course, this is still going to go on. Of course it is. There's all sorts of wonderful apps that people can use. But I'd still like to see students come into a physical space, if possible, so that not only can you support them and help them think about their learning, but also learn from each other. So that's become one of the main important functions of a SALK. Okay, next one. Can we go to the next one? Okay, this was our second SALK, and you can see this was typical. Like, it was packed every day. We outgrew it, as I said, because it would attract hundreds of students, and we didn't have enough space for them to do their own events. So we moved into this place, which is pretty big. And so it definitely has a lot of spaces for students to organize events. There's things going on in I'm talking pre-COVID when I'm talking about things going on. I hope we get there again one day. But typically you'd have somebody running a workshop in one space, a community meeting here, maybe a class going on over here, some advising, peer advising, tutoring, and all sorts of things going on. Let's have a look inside again. Next picture. Can we move to the next one? Okay, so here's inside. So you can imagine, I don't know, think about, it's 2017, so we've just moved into here, and when there's stuff happening, but it's actually very hard to pin down when you think about it. So as a SALK director, in our second SALK, it was a large busy space, but when I walked from my office to the door, I pretty much could see everything that was going on. I knew what was going on. I knew more or less who was there as well. Whereas in this one, you have to really look, it's very hard. People hide in little nooks and crannies, and there's stuff going on everywhere. So I suppose my interest in getting involved in the next phase was triggered by that. Like, how do I know? What are students doing, and how can we support them? So this is where this came from. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so to summarize, we've moved through several phases in self-access and what's next. So I think you know from what I said earlier, we're going to move on to talk more about the psychological needs phase. So let's have a look at that, basic psychological needs and well-being. Do you have any questions? Can I just pause and have some water? So have a think. Is there anything you want to mention about that previous section? No, go back, please. Thanks. So that previous section took you on a sort of journey through self-access through time up to the present, just focusing on social. So is there anything? Okay, I'll read. Love to hear more about the co-learning aspect. Yes, yeah, definitely. I'll get onto that. How to encourage students to use the centre. Oh yeah, I do hear that. Yeah, I think, yeah. I suppose depending on your student population, that could be easy or difficult, right? So honestly, it depends. I suppose you have to do a needs analysis to see what would bring students there. In our case, all our learners are languages majors, and they're all taking English courses. So they've kind of got this desire or interest already. And one of the reasons they came to the university was because of this centre. They were impressed during Open Campus. They've seen all the pictures and everything. That's why they're there. So we don't really have any problems getting people to come in. So we have about 1,000 people coming through our doors every day. But that I realize that doesn't happen everywhere. You know, when I talk to colleagues who work at maybe sciences universities where people are not learning languages, but they have to take an English course, you know, why would they come to such a centre? So you have to be quite creative and think about what would bring people in. So I think it's not an easy one, an easy question to answer. Maybe that's something we can get into in the discussion. So yeah, but pre-COVID, we'd have about 1,000 students a day. Yeah, and we only have a small university. There's only 4,000 students in our university. Yeah, the uptake, it's usually, I think the writing centre and the speaking centre, usually 80% full. Yeah, so it's pretty, yeah, okay. How do we deal with English only? Yeah, that's a bit of a challenge, actually. We have 2 floors. Actually, in our second SALK, we had an English only policy. And because it was quite small and the staff always around, it was fairly easy to maintain that English only policy. And students, you know, it was optional space. They weren't forced to come or anything. So they came because they wanted to practice English. So it actually wasn't too much of a problem. But with this huge new space, there's things going on everywhere. We wanted to create a space where students could use English and have a little bit of pressure to do so. Otherwise they wouldn't, and they want to be pushed, they want to be challenged. So our second floor is English only, and our first floor, I'm so American, aren't I? The ground floor, and this is how we call it in Japan. So the ground floor, first floor as we call it, can be any language, but we of course encourage them to use the languages that they're learning, including English, but it might be Thai, Indonesian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and so on. And the second floor, we try to maintain the English only space. And with mixed success, I must say, yeah, because of the size of it. But if it's a smaller space, it tends to be a bit easier. If you've got staff and volunteer students around modelling language use, it can work. The students have to want to do it. And, you know, if they don't want to do it, then they don't have to come, you know, so that's how it works, I guess. There's a lot of questions. Wow. I wonder if I can come back to some of them later. Yeah, maybe I'll be able to cover many of these as I go along. But if I don't answer it, please make a note and we'll come back to it. Is that okay? Okay, so let's talk about basic psychological needs and well-being. So this has come, so basic psychological needs theory, it proposes that humans have 3 basic needs that have to be present if we're going to thrive and grow. So in an activity, whether it's language learning or performing in the workplace or staying fit or all sorts of things. And so self-determination theory, of course, is a really robust theory of motivation with, you know, decades of research and really solid studies, which frankly we don't have in SelfAccess. And so I was attracted to this self-determination theory because of this strong research background. And I'm keen to try to understand SelfAccess from the lens of self-determination theory. And so if you look at one of the mini theories within SDT is the basic psychological needs theory. And so that looks at competence, which is the need to interact effectively in one's environment and to be optimally challenged, you know, to develop mastery and confidence. Then there's autonomy. This is defined differently in self-determination theory. So earlier I talked about language learner autonomy being, you know, being able to take charge of your learning, but autonomy from a self-determination theory perspective, it's more of, it's the inner endorsement of one's thoughts or goals, feelings and behaviors. So it's a sense of agency over one's choices. Okay. And finally, there's relatedness, which, as you can imagine, is a sense of being connected to others, a feeling of belonging, mutual respect, and even warmth. So looking at the research in other areas, including education and language education, I just thought it just seemed to make a lot of sense because we were looking at social processes, but actually what we mean, or how we could look at it is from a point of view of relatedness. So in addition to just speaking to others, it's about mutual respect and feeling a sense of belonging. So yeah, let's go. Actually, it will just pop up with the 3 basic psychological needs when you click next, Ivan. Okay, so autonomy. Wow, it's really slow on mine. Okay, there you go. So the human base is competence, feeling of effectiveness, autonomy, sense of choice and agency, and relatedness, feeling of connectedness. Okay. So there's this huge space that I showed you earlier, and actually we can examine them from the point of view of these three basic psychological needs. So how do we know if a SALK supports basic psychological needs? How would you go about researching it? I'm just going to pause and have some more to let you think. Wow, these are great questions. I look forward to talking more about these soon. Okay, well, this is what we did. And let's go to the next one. So as you can imagine, we were a research institute as well. And so we conducted some research. There's several papers on this. And in my slides, there's a link to, this is the chapter in this book. And so you can just download the chapter if you want, but it's one of the papers that was published on this. So there was a huge research team made up of learning advisors, teachers, students, student staff, and interns as well, actually. And so we were able to conduct 108 interviews over a 2-week period of users, people using the SALK. And they were chosen randomly. And so different people conducted a fairly structured interview. And there was an online survey, almost 300 people responded to that. And then we had in-depth observations of key areas of the SALK conducted by learning advisors, who are the people who work there every day. So we had all this data, and then we analysed it for, to see whether we could see and what we could learn about whether we supported basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So you can read the chapter for details, but just to give you some of the insights we got from this. Well, in terms, all of them are sort of interconnected when you look at how it's done, I suppose, in practice. But where we found we were promoting autonomy is when there was choice involved, as you might guess. So the first choice is whether to use this centre at all. There are we've never had a policy where students have to use the SALK. It's always been optional, and that's the best. If your philosophy is to promote learner autonomy, and to support basic psychological needs, then I think there would always have to be an active choice. But I can understand some centres might have some compulsory elements, I suppose we ask students to do an orientation. That's as much as we force people to do. But if you can, firstly, a choice whether to use the space or not, and then what to do when they get there. So not like that picture that we saw from the 80s, where everyone seemed to be working on the same worksheet. Give students a choice, what to do, when to go, where to study within the space, how to do it, and with whom. So these seem to me quite basic, but I do see centres where, even the smallest choices are taken away from learners. So I think if you can build in as much choice as possible, that supports the basic psychological needs of autonomy. The choice of language, we talked about this earlier, didn't we? How can we make students speak the target language? And if there are lots of languages being learned as well. So, this really depends on your learners, and you have to be realistic as well. I think very few centres would insist on target language only. There might be spaces where you encourage the L1, or maybe there's a mixture. So what we found is when there are events that students run, actually, where it's English mainly, and then they can rely on their L1 and their other languages, this actually leads to more autonomy. They don't feel so constrained, and they're more likely to enjoy it and use English while they're at it. And the presence of interest-based materials and activities as well, rather than just language materials. Look at something that someone would choose to do in any language. And opportunities for student leadership as well. I'll show you some examples of these in a minute, but we hire students to work there, and there's students who volunteer to organise events and coordinate communities. Okay, competence. This is the thing that we had the biggest challenge with. I don't know if it's because it's the Japanese context, but our students often feel really lacking confidence, and this is because they don't feel that they are good enough. we see this a lot. Even though our students are languages majors, they tend to be quite outgoing for Japanese learners. Many of them are, really lack confidence. And so some of the things we do is to help them feel a sense of mastery over how to learn. So we run workshops and credit courses and modules on how to learn. I'll show you some of the details of that in a bit. We help them to set personal goals and targets and help them see their progress. We give plenty of language practice opportunities in lots of different forms. And we help them access resources and strategies that are beneficial for their learning. So we'll see some examples later of places in our SALK where they particularly lack confidence. And then relatedness, you can create a space which, is conducive to making connections and having a sense of belonging. Maybe not right now. A lot of our furniture is, just single use now, but pre-COVID, the layout of the furniture was very cozy, lots of groups, settings, and we had lots of student staff and volunteers present. We run workshops and events pretty much every day. There's something going on. So there's a chance for students to sort of join naturally, Sometimes tasks and assignments work quite well. So you might set an assignment in class that it is ideally done outside the classroom. And the obvious place would be the SALK. So a lot of our teachers set tasks like things like interview someone about this, this, and this. And they can go to the SALK because there's lots of people around. And so it's an ideal place to interview someone, that kind of thing. And some online social networking as well. I think we can do that better, but I just put that there because I think that could be a way, to develop a sense of belonging as well. Okay. Next one. Yeah, so earlier in the talk, we looked at how we could think about a SALK from a social learning perspective, and I still think we should, definitely. But what I've been thinking about in the last couple of years is thinking about it as a space that not only supports language learning opportunities, but it also supports basic psychological needs, and the inner motivational resources as well. So how can we create a place where people can grow and thrive? So that's something I'm kind of focused on at the moment. So we did this one large study that took a year or more than a year. And I think maybe now's not the right time, but I'd like to do some follow-ups as well to see how students change or make use of the space over time. There's lots of things you could do. But I think drawing on a self-determination theory perspective, we might further expand the role of the SALK. And I think it's ideally placed actually within an institution to support learners beyond the classroom, not just as language learners, but as human beings, as a way to help to contribute to their well-being. Let's go to the next one. So in this chapter that's forthcoming, I've looked into, basically I've drawn on work by John Marshall Reef, 2016 paper, who examines these exact areas within a classroom setting. And so he looks at how a teacher can create a classroom experience that promotes autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But he also draws on what he calls inner motivational resources of curiosity, intrinsic goals, and interest. And I admit this is still quite new to me. And so I'm just adapting what John Marshall Reef has done in classroom settings to self-access settings. I haven't actually tested it. Only what I've done so far is to notice the ways in which we attempt to do this, but I haven't researched it, and I'd love to. So this is something that will be coming soon, I hope. Let's look at the next one. Okay, can we go to the next one? No, that's just a colored version. Next. Okay, so just from my initial thoughts on this, curiosity, which is defined as cognitively generated emotion, and it's the gap, it's an unexpected gap in knowledge. So from my observation, I can see that we do certain things that promote curiosity as an inner resource for learning. For example, observing other learners, so seeing other students do presentations and events and using English confidently, that creates this curiosity. Oh, how do I do that then? Next one is a variety of target language sources and opportunities, different things that they can do in the target language that might spark their curiosity. And also raise awareness of scenarios, you know, asking students, or this was John Marshall Reeves' suggestion actually, come up with, you know, you want to introduce yourself to a new classmate from overseas, what do you say? So give yourself that question, oh, what would I say? How am I going to go about finding out how to do that? So these are kind of examples of curiosity sparking areas that you could integrate into your SALK. Okay, next one. Intrinsic goals. This will come through the advising process, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a few minutes. And so learning advisors and our approach is really to do really reflective activities. So students really think about, you know, what is meaningful for me? How am I going to grow through this? And so the dialogue is really powerful, but also tools for self-evaluation. We have a tools section in our SALK as well that encourage students to think deeply about what they're doing. Next one. And interest. Yeah, this could be triggered, you know, situational, or just, you know, sort of a initial spark of interest, or it could be more individual interest, which is more enduring. Some materials and activities in a SALK are going to be inherently interesting, others not so much, so they need to be kind of pointed out, really. You know, notes, explanations, recommendations, posters, videos, these kinds of things help students find something that could be really of interest for them, and you know, maybe fundamental for sustained learning over time. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, our website is instrumental, and our social media for highlighting different areas that might be of interest or triggering curiosity. Next. Okay, pause. So we've looked at some of the ways to support basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So the attempt is to create the conditions for students to thrive. Okay, what's next? Let's go on. So let's look at our role in all of this then. It's the roles of teachers and learning advisors. Okay, next one. So what jumps to mind then when you think of the roles that we have in a SALK? Just have a think, feel free to type in if you feel like it. What are the most important roles for us as educators? Ah. Yeah, nice. Okay, great. Okay. I suppose think about is there anything we can do to shift the responsibility onto the learners themselves, you know? Is it our job to analyse their needs, or is there something we can do to help the students analyse their own needs, for example? Okay, let's have a look at how we might do that. Let's go on. So I think if anybody's heard me talk about anything in the past, sooner or later I'm going to talk about advising, because it's so interesting and important. So the definition of advising is the process and practice of helping students to direct their own path so as to become more effective and more autonomous language learners. So this is what we're doing in the SelfAccess Centre. Let's go to the next one. And so more recently, I've developed my interest in advising alongside my colleague Satoko Kato. So this book came out in 2015, 2016. And so we're talking about transformational advising. So this is where you're going beyond language proficiency. You're actually helping students to challenge, you know, what they think about things. Their whole awareness is being, you know, challenged. And so raise awareness of what it is they're doing, and translate this into some sort of action and make a fundamental change often in the nature of learning. So we see learners transform through this process. Let's have a look what it looks like. Next one. Okay, so this is the second version of this. The first one I published in 2010. So this came out 10 years later. And so it's drawing on a more ecological perspective, as you can probably gather. So it looks at various different environments that learning might take place in. But fundamentally, in the middle there, you've got the learner's thinking deeply, the advisor is listening. Both of them are engaged in deep internal reflective dialogue. internal dialogue. And this is facilitated by the advising process, so which we are calling intentional reflective dialogue. So it's not just random chat and it's not giving advice, it's helping someone to think really deeply with the intention of helping them to formulate ideas and take action. And this is surrounded by dynamic tools. They have these are the sort of reflective activities often that help people to consider themselves deeply and make fundamental changes. So sorry, that was really quick, wasn't it? But just basically, this is where I'm situating advising. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so let's see what advising might look like. So if your role is teacher, I'm a traditional teacher, I guess. This one, when you click each button, Ivan, it will come up with part of the dialogue. So first one. Okay, so this is the student. She says, I'm working on this grammar book. I don't know if what I'm doing is right. Where should I start? How much do I need to study? So, we get questions like this. So if you're in teacher mode, if you click the next one, you might give a reasonable response. Like, we're very experienced. We sort of have ideas. We could answer this, right? The teacher might say, oh, this book doesn't seem right for your level. Why don't you try this one? Start from verb tense, try to finish a chapter a week. I mean, maybe it's decent advice. And if the student did this, maybe she would get somewhere. But actually, this is not what advising looks like. Let's click the next one. The student might say, okay, I will, but will she? And will she really think about what she's doing? So if you're an advisor, here's the same scenario. Student says, I'm working on this grammar book. I don't know if I'm doing this right. Okay, pause, don't click. So I wanted you to think. So what's next then, if you're in advisor mode? Would you give a solution like the other one did? And what would you do in that case? Right, yeah. Okay, maybe you don't need me to tell you this. Excellent. Yeah, reflection, ask questions, listen, etc. Okay, let's look at an example of how it might go. So I see. So she's listening carefully and she's repeating, actually, so the student can hear what she's saying back. And that's often quite powerful, even if you don't say anything else. You just repeat it back. Oh, so you don't know if you're doing it right. It's like, oh, someone's listening to me. Yeah, no, you're right. And so on. Next. Yeah, and I've only finished one chapter so far. I was planning to do more. So she's given you more information. And then what's next? Okay, can you tell me more? Nice open question. Student's relaxed. She's talking about what she wants to do. Okay, what's next? Okay, she's starting to analyze herself a bit. Even when my motivation's high, I can't work on it. Okay, next one. And then there's maybe a why question. Maybe not straight away, but let the student explain her situation and then maybe come in with a, why do you think you can't study even if your motivation's high? I think often if an advisor asks a why question too early, the trust is gone. She's not really listening. But if you get a bit more information about what the student's doing and let her explain, and then maybe a powerful question starting with why might be just what she needs. So why do you think you can't study as you want? What's next? Can you click the next one? Okay, so maybe there's silence actually. So she's thinking deeply. Maybe this is where the reflection's really starting. Okay, so it's really different from the first one, isn't it? It takes longer, of course it does, but often more effective, and the student will come up with something, probably. Maybe not in the first session. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so students come to us with all sorts of things. I'm sure you recognize these. Don't have time to study. I can't enjoy learning English, or I feel alone. I tried so many things, nothing's working. I don't, this person really needs help. And so we do help students with these kinds of things. And we basically do this same thing. We listen carefully. We help them understand themselves. We don't rush it. We may offer a solution, not a solution. We may offer some suggestions, but we tend to let the students come up with them themselves. So these are students who are usually in trouble, usually quite negative. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see students we also deal with every day. Next one. Okay, so this one, you know, the student's quite, oh no, go back. Students quite positive in the second one. Can you go back one? Okay, you know, it's more like, I got my test score, now what, you know? They want to thrive, right? How can I make the most of my time? I'm really interested in this. How can I learn this through English? How can I push myself? These kinds of things. So you never know what you're going to get with advising. And you always start with what the learner brings you, or you help them understand what it is they're bringing to you, even if that's not what they say in the first place. Okay, let's go to the next one. Actually, one of the examples is I love watching movies, but is this really learning? I think someone asked the question earlier, is using movies for learning really, really useful? So maybe the answer to that one is if the student has decided it's part of their study plan, then yeah, sure. Okay, so the advising process, I mean, this makes it look formulaic, it isn't, but just to give you an idea of how it might look, let's go. Let's look at the process. So once you click, you'll get each one. Hi then, thanks. Is it moving? Oh, okay. Maybe it's just me, it's delayed. So, you know, first one, you might want to find out who the learner is, some background information, even life story. It depends on the learner. You know, some people don't want to be going into that. You can kind of tell if the student wants to share or not. My experience is usually they love it. No one ever asks them. So they're usually very happy to share. And we use advising strategies like repeating, restating, summarizing, empathizing, complementing, experience sharing at the beginning. So you're building trust and learning about them. Then you might help the student clarify what the issue actually is. So they're broadening their perspective. So, you know, we bring in strategies like using metaphors or meta view, powerful questions, challenging, intuiting. And then after that, the learner comes up with an action plan. This doesn't usually happen in one session. It does sometimes. Usually it takes a couple of sessions to get here, or maybe even more. Our sessions are 30 minutes. Maybe if you had a longer session, you could. Interestingly, when we switched to online, many of us noted that we covered all of these things in one session in a way that we didn't in person. And I don't know what that means, but it's just something that a few of us noticed. I think there are fewer distractions. The students are really focused. It's just us on the Zoom. You know, there's no one around them. And there's not as much small talk, I suppose. There aren't sort of things to comment on in the background, maybe. Anyway, sorry, that was extra. And then what's next? Am I delayed? Can you go on to the next one? Okay, and then maybe the student can come up with a future vision, make a declaration, even, you know, right, I'm going to do this because this is what I want to achieve or something like that. Okay, and take some accountability. So just to give you a little taste of sort of how we think about the advising process. Next one. I mean, you can do this in class as well, of course, but self-access centres are ideally suited because we tend to be able to meet students one-to-one, and they come in and it's optional. Okay, and so we're basically looking at this process. So often at the beginning of their learning trajectory, students are just getting started. They haven't really taken charge of their learning much before. They haven't been given the chance often. So you're helping them in a different way. Like later on, when they're quite aware, the kind of advising you do is a bit different. Yeah. Okay, next one. So basically, their depth of reflection increases over time. And this is just quick, you can look later, but we run a course on this. It's 5-part certificate course in advising online. So if anybody's interested, there are a couple of places left and the deadline is tomorrow. So this is brilliant timing, isn't it? So if you're interested in doing course 1, it starts on May 2nd. We teach it on Sunday afternoon in Japan. So it's Sunday morning, early Sunday morning in UK. Okay, next. So to summarize, we've looked at the role of advising, and so we look at how we help learners to think deeply and develop an awareness and control over their learning. And the final one, maybe I'll do fairly quickly, because then we can maybe discuss areas of interest to you after that. Questions? Okay, Alice has asked about tech-mediated learning. That might get us off away from, maybe we can come back to it later, yeah. So here's, I'll just leave this picture up there. So we talked about self-determination theory and basic psychological needs theory. And these are fairly common areas in a SALK, actually. Even basic SALKs will have some kind of conversation area, ideally some kind of learning help desk, drop-in desk, maybe some tutoring, study spaces, and so on. So we'll just take a few of them and look at, how can we see that this has supported learners' basic psychological needs? Maybe you can be thinking to yourself, how would these spaces support basic psychological needs? Okay, obviously we haven't got time to do all of them, but I'm going to run and do quickly. Let's go to the next one. So a big thing was to support competence and relatedness, actually. And one of our big studies was in the conversation lounge. Let's go to the next one. You may have heard my colleagues talking about this one. So this is our English language lounge, our English lounge, or yellow sofa, as students call it, as you can see why. And when we moved into our new building, it was really fascinating. We just really wanted to know what was going on in it, So look at my next slide. There's a question for you. What happens in the conversation lounge? We sort of made these observations. There are some students that basically lived there. They're there every day. They're very actively involved in using English. There were other students, they would tell us in classes they didn't want to go there. They were frightened to go, or they thought they had no place in their language learning. There were all sorts of things. There seemed to be groups forming, but then other groups were forming. There was a lot going on. And so we turned this into basically a 2-year ethnography. And our overarching question was, what happens in the conversation lounge? So let's go, and I obviously can't go through all of it, but let's have a look at a couple of things. Next slide. So of course we did lots of observations of the lounge. We interviewed students, and it turned out that there were 3 types of students, 3 groups that were included in our study. So one was the people who were there all the time, real community that were focused around the SALK in this lounge. There were occasional users, and then there were the other group that did not use it, did not want to, and there were different reasons for that. We explored their language learning histories as well. So this book came out, last year, and it was the results of the 2-year ethnography. And we explored this lounge, just this one space, from the perspective of learner beliefs and individual difference factors, community membership, and identity as well. So if you're interested in that, have a look later. But it was a really fascinating study. Just a small part of the SALK had such rich data. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so we've noticed things like this. I'll let you read it. I'm going to paste the link to the course in the chat while you read that. Okay, so that's the course. Yeah, so as you can imagine, so many students do this. They're working by themselves, or they maybe just have surface level conversations. These are the students who've plucked up the courage to go. Of course, there are many students who don't go at all. And let's go to the next slide. But we also noticed this. They were leading challenging discussions with others, mentoring others. They were observing others and influencing sense of belonging. Their stuff was everywhere. They were sleeping. They lived there. And also, many of them demonstrated high levels of autonomy in the language learner autonomy sense. They knew why they were there and how it could help them with their learning. They were high control over their learning. Okay, next. And so we did notice a kind of trajectory for English lounge use. So before using the lounge, where they wouldn't come at all, and there were different reasons for that. And then maybe they'd tentatively come with a friend, or their teacher would invite them or something like that. And then they would gradually become an occasional user of the lounge. Then they would start reflecting on, why am I here and what could I get out of this process? And then two things could happen. One is that they would realize they had outgrown the lounge and it's not real English, and I can get practice elsewhere. Or I'm deeply invested in this and I want to support others and help others. And so we saw both of those things happening. And so the ones who went on and felt they had a role to play really became quite protective of the space. They wanted other students to come and learn too, the way they had, and support them. And even after they graduated, some students and the tools question, no, I don't think we were looking at translanguaging as a pedagogy. I have to look that up, I don't know. Thanks, next one. Yeah, there's one question earlier. It's a place for students just to chat. Yeah, well, it could be. And I think in many places, this lounge could be, yeah, rock up, chat, practice your English. And I think that's probably how the original version started. But thanks to this study and just really observing what was happening and then, interviewing the students, we felt we could support them more, especially in competence. So can you imagine, I mean, we're all educators, I'm sure you can come up with ways that we could support the development of competence in a conversation lounge. So this is something now, when teachers come in, we kind of engage them in talking about this. So let's look at the next one. So here are some of the things. I mean, you probably have a million ideas, but promote the role of peers as role models and as conversation partners and things like that. Rather than it's a place where I can speak to a native speaker teacher. We definitely didn't want the lounge to be somewhere like that. Even though teachers do go there, they have a duty period there. Not all the time, but there are teachers scheduled there throughout the day. But the purpose is, just to support the learners rather than to be the only conversation partner. And support conversation through strategy awareness, conversation prompts, games, things like that, to help students express themselves. Yeah, organise occasional events and meetups. I mean, teachers and learning advisors do this, but better if students can do it. And so we've been involved in nurturing student leaders to organise these kinds of events and really promote it as a space for communities to form. Help students. And, you might meet a student who's interested in this, and then another student is interested in the same thing, and you get them together and encourage them to create an event or a meetup. And to engage learners in reflective dialogue, just through like the advising process. So teachers on duty can do this too. Okay, structured awareness raising. Can I just go really quickly through this? Okay. So obviously we want to raise awareness and control over one's learning. We just mentioned briefly earlier that we do this through courses, credit courses and workshops. I just want to show you what that looks like, that's all. Again, this is developed to promote a sense of competence. Yeah, so it's necessary for successful outside class learning. Okay, next one. Yeah, so this is the way we structure it. So the focus is on promoting autonomous language learning, and we raise of the self, approaches to learning, strategies, resources, and awareness of the facilities, the roles, and the resources as well. So we do this through our courses and advising and modules, okay, worksheets and handouts and little things dotted around the SALK. Next one. So this is our drop-in desk. I was sitting there today. It looks almost the same, except there's a screen and a little gap. It looks like I'm selling tickets. It's awful, actually, but I suppose we'll get used to it. It was only day one. Anyway, so we run an effective learning module that has different units. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, and the next one. It used to be paper-based, but now we're using an app called Moxtra to organize this. So basically, it's not much different. They're PDF forms instead of paper. But so the first part, the grey square, so we raise awareness of strategies and self-directed learning skills. you know, how to set goals, how to think about yourself as a learner, what do you need, what strategies can help you achieve your goals, what resources combined with those strategies would you need, how can you increase your confidence, motivation, and take charge of your time, and then create a plan. And then the second part is implementation of your personalized learning plan. And this is done in conjunction with peers. So usually have groups of students working or at least supporting each other. They might have different goals, but they talk to each other about their goals and their process. We had this as a project. So we had a forum as well. So students could share each week, either, you know, with their friends or online. Yeah, next one. So yeah, it's a 45-hour course and it's 1 credit. It's a lot of work for 1 credit. The students get really into it because they set a goal they really care about. So they tend to do more than you imagine. We've done a bit of research on this and you can look at the references later. But basically the upshot is the course is successful at introducing self-directed learning skills and a sense of awareness. And, you know, broadly, there are some, I mean, we could improve all of it. What we found with our research, it takes longer to be able to self-evaluate, as you probably know, but it's, yeah, but basically it's a successful course. Next one. Okay, and this is my final example. And somebody asked about communities earlier, and I promised we'd come back to this, so here it is. And this is thanks to my awesome colleague, Satiko Watkins. So she's the principal learning advisor in charge of learning communities. So her job is to promote communities in the SALK, and she does a wonderful job. And these are just some of the groups that have formed with Satiko's guidance. I mean, they talk to learning advisors, but basically students take leadership over something they really care about, and they help others to join the group, and they all support each other. So these have all come out of student interest. Okay, next one. Can we go to the next one? Maybe I feel like maybe I'm on a delay or something. So this was one of our event days where different groups had exhibitions and activities. So you can just see how the students really take charge of the space when given the opportunity. We definitely didn't want it to be a space where the teachers are in charge. We wanted it to be somewhere where the learners felt a sense of ownership. And I think these events are really important for that. Next one. So this is a regular conversation group that's student-led as well. They just meet up and have lunch every week, you know, once a week, and bring some discussion. You know, one of them comes up with the discussion questions and something like that. Very simple. Next one. Last year we were online, and so the students still really wanted to do it. And so this is how it looked. So they'd have their posters, and then they have their Zoom link, and the leaders would create events every week for the others. Okay. Next one. So these links are on our website, but they were all completely student run. And how can student-led learning communities support competence? Well, this is something that we're learning more about, but thanks to research by Satiko Watkins and Daniel Hooper as well, different projects, we're starting to learn a bit more about this. And the next slide just has a little summary of some of their findings. I'm not going to do their research justice, I know, but just a few things. So they've looked, you know, at observations of the groups. They've interviewed members and leaders. They've looked at their learning histories, and they've done surveys with members and leaders. So some of the findings of their projects are on the next slide. So giving, as you might imagine, giving students these opportunities promotes leadership. We see the development of interdependency and altruism. The fact that students want to help others is really strong. This is what holds them together and develops their confidence too. Creates a sense of belonging. They develop their confidence and they focus on their interests, you know, which might be Star Wars, sci-fi movies, and they suddenly they don't worry about their language skills. They're just talking about their passion and supporting each other. That has a huge impact on not only their the relatedness, but also their sense of competence and confidence. Next one. Can we go to the next one? Am I on pause? Okay, so the next one is just a recap, just as well because my voice is going. So we looked at why we're interested in learning beyond the classroom. We did a little historical journey of self-access. Then we focused on what I think is the next phase, which is looking at well-being and psychological needs. And then we focused on the role that we might have, particularly advising. And then we saw 3 examples of support basic psychological needs in self-access. So all I have left is just some resources, I think. Let's just go on and then we'll stop. I think I'm the director of the SelfAccess Centre, but I'm also the director of the Research Institute for Learner Autonomy Education. So we're quite, reflection questions. They're first. I was going to share a link to the Research Institute. So I asked you at the beginning, what did you hope to get out of this session? And I'm kind of scared to ask, but to what extent was this achieved? And if there's something you didn't get out of it, it's going to be next question, of course. So can you remember what you said you wanted to get out of it? And was it achieved? Was the next one. And then can you go to reflection questions 2? Next slide. So what will you need in order to create an autonomy supportive space outside the classroom at your institution, if that's something you want to do? And what steps will you take? So they're just some things for you to think about. And the resources, as I mentioned, there's the website for our Research Institute. So you can read details about our studies. There's some resources there as well. We have 2 journals and they're all open access. So one of them is specifically self-access. The other one is for learner autonomy and teacher autonomy. And I know it's not a very catchy URL, but and there's a certificate in advising. If anyone's interested, so the deadline is tomorrow. And that might be it, I think. Oh yeah, this is just in case anyone asks me about the certificate in advising, or if you want to read more about what sort of things we look at in the course. Okay, so maybe I'll stop there, shall I? Okay, so this is if you want the slides, and we could paste them in. I think we already pasted them in the chat, didn't we?
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. I apologize for the delay in the slides because it takes longer to load with pictures. I try my very best to hit every time you say thanks.
I realized that. Yeah, sorry. I can't resist all those lovely pictures.
Oh, it's a very interesting talk. And so right now we have around like 30 minutes or so to answer questions, and we have a backlog of questions in the chat. So Mel, do you think it's a good idea maybe to read aloud some of those chat questions? Maybe you can pick some, and then we'll open the floor to everyone maybe in the last 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Mel.
Yeah. I also just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Mynard. That was fantastic. I was just hoping to learn more about SALKs, just kind of how they work and how I could maybe borrow some of their practices in my own teaching. And you provided such a wealth of information. It's great. I got more out of it than I bargained for. So thank you so much.
Oh, wow. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
So I'll start with some questions. These are from, earlier in the talk. Liang Wang asks, do students need to book space for events? And I think this is just from much earlier on when you were introducing your SALK. How does that work? Are students required to book things, or is it just kind of open? when they come in?
Yeah, there are some areas they can book, like they can book the stage, which is nice, where the screen comes down and they can show a movie or something. So they have to book that. They can book the workshop area, which is sort of a seating area with tables, so they can have their meetings there or organize events. And what else? And the sofa. Oh yeah, the exhibition space, yellow sofas, part of that they can do, and the exhibition space as well. So if they want to display some posters. So yeah, we have an online booking system for those. But there's plenty of other spaces they could just meet casually. They don't need an appointment.
That's great.
So, yeah.
So there's drop-in too. So a question from Alexia is, do students report benefits in linguistic performance after learning from one another?
Yeah, they do. And I'm thinking, I wish I had Satiko Watkins with me. I don't know if she's here. But I think Satiko and Dan, when they've been looking at, so Satiko's looking at it from a self-determination theory perspective, and Dan is looking at it from a communities of practice perspective. But I believe both sets of data have shown development not only in confidence, but they attribute to linguistic development to the activities they've done with their peers. But I mean, I think we need a lot more research. This is just a couple of studies in one institution.
Yeah. Thanks. Aguilar was wondering about cost. What about for students who can't afford, I don't know, memberships or something like that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, our SALK, we're a private university, and I guess students, pay their fees, and this is one of the benefits, is that they get to use the Selfie Centre. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way, Like I've worked in a high school once in, where I'm trying to think of a better example, but I've seen good examples where there have been shoestring self-access centres in classrooms. Like I've done it myself in, low-funded jobs, where you have a cupboard and students bring stuff in. And you still make opportunities for peer learning. You have a corner of your classroom, a shelf, whatever you can, or if there's a cupboard or an empty classroom that can be used, it usually takes the initiative and the enthusiasm of some staff and students, though, and you can try and win over the authorities. But yeah, it can be done. I think a type 2 SALK often starts that way, very low budget, high enthusiasm, and lots of participation by students. So yeah, I think any budget, you can do it.
Right, yeah. Oh, cool. Caroline's asking how to evaluate informal learning in this context.
Yeah, have we done it? Well, yeah, I don't think we've done it enough. And I'd like to replicate some of the studies that have been done, for example, in Australia by Phil Benson, and actually in other parts of Japan by Andrew Tweed, did for his PhD. And they've used apps, basically, and social media, like maybe not Line, maybe Instagram or something that students use, and they document their learning. And so students spend a period of time documenting the language that they use in their everyday life informally. And then you can interview them about it. And so they're the sort of studies that have been done elsewhere. So we've done something similar, but not as extensive as those two researchers that I've mentioned. Yeah, we've done it we did one project with 5 students where we asked their permission, of course, and then we documented all of their self-directed work and interviewed them periodically about it and asked them about the choices they made and why and what they were doing at the time. Yeah, but again, they're quite small scale. So we need a few more of those, I think.
Yeah, well, that's great. Alice asks, so this was a question from earlier that I think you maybe flagged. Do you have suggestions for exploring autonomy in tech-mediated learning?
Although the example that springs to mind is the one I did with my colleague Wart Peters from Belgium. And so we had, he set up, it's mostly him, but I helped him with the analysis. But he set up Google Classrooms, but you can do it with any forum. And what we looked at instances where students are supporting others and demonstrating use of strategies and growing awareness. So we've done it over a sort of a semester or 2 semesters where you do see developing awareness of taking responsibility for their learning. So that's one way we've done it. What else could we do? So that's one, I would say. So I don't know if it's autonomy or it's maybe just strategy use, but obviously strategy use is an indicator that someone's developing autonomy as well.
Yeah. And then here's a question from Rebecca. Just curious about this.
As evidence of autonomy.
I'm curious about the space in the center, just related to the size of the student population. It does look large. Is it? Yeah, looks like there's enough room for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that relative space? And
yeah, our student population is 4,000, and it's hard to know like how many. I mean, at the moment, obviously we've removed some of the chairs, but we could probably fit 300. It's hard to say because people stand up or they sit on the ground and things like that. But we could probably comfortably fit 300 people in there. So maybe but it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Like one of our goals was to have a social learning community in space for events and classes and things like that. But if it's just for the self-directed learning element, then you wouldn't need to be so big. Yeah. But some space for social groups is good.
Yeah. I have another question. This is from Lynn, who was joining from the US, so it was a bit early for them. They may have.
Oh, yeah, I know.
To start, but Lynn says, I'm trying to build online communities and opportunities for students to learn from one another. So this is online communities. Are there some principles that you think might apply here too?
Oh, definitely. And maybe I can put you in touch with Satika Watkins, because she has really nurtured these communities this year. So they used to be ones that would meet in the SALK regularly in person. They'd have lunch together, and every week they would talk about whatever their particular interest was. And then we switched online, and they were so keen to keep this going that they just, I don't know if we had one that started as an online community. We probably did. But there was already a kind of template because they'd attended events from others. So what we did at the beginning of the year was have a kind of learning community fair, so the students could dip in and out and see what communities were on offer and what they did, and then they could join one or they could start their own. And so the encouragement and the structure is something we could do. And after that, you just have to let them go. I mean, some of them were meeting every day, and the Star Wars enthusiasts jumped to mind. And others would just meet every couple of weeks, or it was surrounded by an event. They were organising some awareness raising event, and so they would just meet for that, and then perhaps they wouldn't meet after that. So really, just give the students freedom to run with it, whatever it is that suits them.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Lynn? What was the beginning? Did I answer it okay? Yeah.
Seemed like it. There's one other question that just popped up, and this is from Sevda, who asks, and I think this is talking when you had that earlier table about the different types of SALKs. Any suggestions for moving from a type 2 to a type 1?
Yeah, unfortunately, usually it involves budget, doesn't it? So hiring a learning advisor, hiring somebody who's in the SALK all the time and is invested in it. So sometimes what happens, maybe in a type 3 it could be a situation where a faculty member is given responsibility for a SALK, but it's not really their area of interest. It's just, their committee or their duty or something, and they're not really invested. And then in a type 2, you've got the people who are interested, but they're not actually officially appointed. So maybe trying to officially appoint somebody who's already started something would be fantastic. And that's what happened in our case. Lucy Cooker started the very small one and then was appointed as a coordinator after that. So, yeah. So staff, leadership.
Good. Yeah, I think you can expect some emails rolling in from some of you.
Yeah, I imagine that's okay.
But that looks like that's it, Sin Wong, for all the questions in the chat. Okay. We can move to live questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mel. So right now we have around 10 to 15 minutes. So if there's anybody who'd like to come on, turn on your camera. Of course, you raise your hand, let us know. Would like to ask Joe some questions, or even from center members. If you, Ashlyn. Good, Ashlyn.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mynard. That was a really, really wonderful talk, and I'm glad that everyone has been able to engage so well in the chat. So thank you very, very much. There's so much, I think, to talk about there, and so I'll be very selfish and pursue my own interest, if I may, and hopefully it'll connect.
Go for it, Aisling.
Thank you. I was very, very interested in the conversation lounge and the ethnographic research project that you did, and I suppose it ties into a question that was raised. I think, I'm sorry, I haven't got the name of the person who was questioning the notion of one language at a time, English only. So I'm always very interested in any context and where that happens, as to how it's monitored and policed, and I put that in those particular way. So I'm always really interested in that, particularly in the context of what we've spoken about around agency and relatedness of the space, and taking new looks at what autonomy really means. So it's about power shift there around agency and relatedness. So I suppose that's a bit that I'm really interested in. And the other is around the conversation lounge, about your observations. How did you carry those out? Were they recordings? Were they? And the reason why I ask is our previous seminar series speaker, Professor Bassiante, had talked about multilingual spaces in university contexts. Instances where it's hushed multilingualism, where the notion of kind of moving between different languages and linguistic resources and semiotic resources, how that happens. So I'm just interested to hear more about those issues. So it's not really a question as much as an invitation to kind of share your thoughts around those particular matters.
Oh yeah, so interesting, Aisling. Thank you. Oh, where to start? Really, it was kind of funny when you said, how do you police it? Oh, the conversations we've had about this over the years, seriously. Actually, my colleagues, Hugh Davis and Yuri Imamura, have published a little bit on this. So they interviewed, or they had student research assistants interview other students about language policy, because we had to decide, on our language policy, and we had to be quite clear on it. What did students want? This is what we wanted to know. And the evidence was quite clear. They wanted an English only space. They wanted teachers to be very strict. They wanted to be told off when, someone didn't use English and all this kind of stuff. And that was really clear. And so, of course, based on that and other things, our reading of the literature, our use of resources and everything, our own beliefs is, so this came from the students. So we created this English only space. So, of course, what happens is that not everyone uses English, right? And so when you ask them why, it's really complex. So this was part of the reason behind the ethnography as well. We wanted to understand why people, why some people did want to use English and why some people didn't. And I'm still not quite sure I understand, if I'm absolutely honest. I think we still need to do a bit more digging. Some of it is cultural, and some of it is just natural, really. I mean, if you're sitting there with other L1 speakers of Japanese, it's not very natural to switch to English, is it? And so you kind of want a teacher figure to tell you to do it. So no matter how much agency you have. And our survey, we do annual surveys every year of the SALK. And what comes through is, people are disappointed that they don't use as much English as they want, but it's really difficult. Sometimes it's they don't have the confidence to do it. And so that's what we're working on by developing competence and confidence through our workshops and helping students take charge of their learning and consider their agency and all that stuff. But yeah, it's but we're very uncomfortable. We want the students to use English because they want to and they've chosen to. So there's this conflict. So we want to respect students' autonomy to use whatever language they want, obviously. But on the other hand, they have told us that they need us to police it in a way. So yeah, it's hard. And so we try and do it in a really supportive way. And we do it, workshops in classrooms work quite well. So you help students in groups, they discuss what do they want, what language do they want to use in the SALK? They always say English. How are they going to support each other in doing that? And then they make a commitment to go with their friends and use English. So starting with groups like that in classrooms is really successful. Yeah. And often it just needs a little prompt. Students are there, they switch to Japanese and you just go and have a little chat with them. Oh, how's it going? And then they can switch and they feel it's okay to speak English then. So the staff role in modelling is quite useful. But yeah, I don't know, I'm rambling because it's really hard and it's something we struggle with as well. So that was the first part, wasn't it? And the second one was the ethnography, how we did it.
Yes.
Well, at first we were just noticing things, just casually, you know, oh, that's interesting. Why are those students always there? Why do they choose that spot? Why does this student always seem to be, you know, that kind of thing. And then a group of us thought we'd do this a bit more systematically. And I've forgotten the name of the, I guess I should know this off the top of my head. We spent enough time doing it, but we used a framework that we got from another researcher. Wish I could remember who it was, but it's one from the 80s, but it was about observing social spaces, not necessarily in language, and we adapted it. And this involved one of our members as well, making a diagram of the space. And so one of us would just sit there for a couple of hours and just note down what we saw. And then we analysed this and themes emerged, and then we were able to use those in interviews later, you know. So that's kind of how we started it, just systematic observation. It's not as easy as it looks, because if you sit in the space and the student sees you, they want to chat, you know, and they say, well, what are you doing with that clipboard? And you have to, you know, you have to tell them, right? And then, you know, we had to run it through ethics as well, the ethics committee, and share the results with the students and that kind of thing. And then as far as interviewing students went, for regular users, we left invitation cards on the tables in the lounge. You know, if you'd like to participate in a research and be paid, please email us. And so we had no problems getting the regular users. It was a lot harder finding people who never used the lounge, because we wanted to hear from them. Of course we did. So we had to rely on our own, you know, our own students. Basically, we asked people in classrooms we were teaching, if anybody's interested in participating in this research, you know, answer a few questions. And one of the questions was, have you ever used the English lounge? There were other things as well, but that was the one we wanted. And then we picked students who had indicated that they'd never used it. And so that's how we got the third group. And then we interviewed them over 2 years, and then analysed their language learning history as well. And so a lot of it comes from their beliefs and their previous learning experiences. That was pretty interesting. And then Dan Hooper's chapter looked at how the communities formed as well, and what the makeup of the community was like. Yeah, my chapter was on identity, and that was pretty interesting, because whether students use the lounge or not, a lot of it was part of their personal identity. You know, I'm not the sort of person who just sits around in an English conversation lounge. I'm a serious student. I'm studying grammar downstairs, you know, things like that. It's part of my identity as a language learner. Or, you know, anyway, it was pretty interesting.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, it really does, part of the first part of your response there really does show us, I think, how important context-sensitive responses are, because being able to acknowledge that a language policy or an approach has to be specific to its context of use, and what will work in one and what's appropriate in one area will not easily transfer to another. And I think that, I mean, how you described being able to gather information from what it is that students want through, and being able to use that to inform, I think is you know, certainly a different approach that would happen elsewhere for the top-down policy. So thank you very much. That's great, and thank you very much for sharing so much information that gives and references that pushes everyone here to read more. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. It seems like Caroline has a question. Caroline?
Yes, I do, and it follows on what Aisling just said very nicely. The thing that I appreciated the most from the talk was that within this online context, I have never seen such a high level of participation amongst the participants for online discussion. And this is where, to me, the method is often the message. And the fact that you were able to, there were so many people participating through the chat and really actively participating, I found extremely impressive. And it was such a breath of fresh air from the number of talks that I go to where you feel zoomed out and you feel like it's nothing more than mugshots. Is there this approach that you used, I thought was so effective. Have you come to it for a specific reason, or of using the online discussion feature while you were talking and soliciting questions during the talk? Any comments about that? Again, it was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. You know what? I've never really got feedback on my presentations before. I feel you've made my day. Thank you. I suppose mostly I'm sick of the sound of my voice and I get very dry. No, but mostly I suppose my job is to engage learners in reflective dialogue, right? And it spills over into other parts of my life. I can't help myself. So I ask questions as I go along, and it's just something I do, I suppose. And the chat function allows for that. So yeah, it worked really well today. I'm really happy. We had so many great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was, and I think that's exactly, when you say reflective dialogue, I think it's the only time that I've really seen reflective dialogue incorporated through a computer-mediated digital environment. So again, thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've been teaching the online course on advising with Satiko Kato for a couple of years now, and it's what we do in the course because, you know, the course is about advising and reflective dialogue, and so all our activities, all our lectures are this kind of style. So I suppose we realise it works quite well in that course too.
Now, when you were you in lockdown at all in Japan?
It's not called that, but yeah, I suppose we've been working from home for a year. Yeah, just gone back this week.
And did you use some of these same strategies when you were working from home as far as the online chat function?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that combined with breakout rooms and Google Docs as well. There's a smaller group. Yeah, and so where people are sharing as they go along is nice.
Do you have any tips on using the Google Docs or the other strategies or techniques?
Well, one of them, Google Docs, is really good. So you send a link and then everyone goes to the same document and they all type in their ideas and they can see what other people are saying, especially if it's something really interesting like, you know, what are your goals for how much English do you want to use this year? How are you going to do it? You know, so I think something like that. They realize that all of the other students are actually quite shy and they also feel that other students want to improve in their areas. So they can compare easily as well. So that works quite well. You can, you know, and answer each other and in real time. I think it's nice.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of our participants, Lynn, raised her hand. Do you want to come on? And yeah.
Hi, Lynn. It's really early for you, isn't it?
Hi, Dr. Mynard. Thank you for the presentation. I'm so interested because I mentioned that recently I started an online community and I'm using the platform called Discord. It was used to be for gamers, but now it is a place where people go and talk, and it's really easy to set up. So I have a list of about 70 something participants, and we do a group activity every Monday, and usually there's about 15 people join. And currently it's very structured. I developed a list of questions. They can come and discuss these questions. I also provide them with a video to watch in advance. And listening to you, I think that, okay, it's time maybe to encourage them to do more of their own topics and perhaps just come anytime and talk with one another. That's one thing. The second thing that I have been thinking and I will try to do is to develop more tasks, right? Not just a list of questions, but also communicative tasks, because task-based language teaching is one of my interests. And then the third thing is to do research, and I'm very interested in all of those ideas, and I have kind of eased the students in, and I haven't really done any research or observation. So I just want to say that you encourages me to maybe do a few things, and I actually welcome any students to join because it's a free opportunity. I do this to create kind of an intercultural learning environment for the students as well. It's not just students from Vietnam, but students from other countries can join. So so I just want to share, and if anyone would like to collaborate to create it, to make it an opportunity for their students and also to collaborate on research, I will welcome that, because I think I would love to have collaboration and some guidance so that we can do something and grow it into something meaningful. And I made a comment in the chat as well that interestingly, naturally, when the students enter this space, they use English. I haven't seen any Vietnamese. Even when they talk, most of them are Vietnamese. So sometimes I feel like maybe the expectation and the mentality when you enter a space help them to maybe switch to another language. and just an observation. I haven't done any systematic observation. And my question about principles that apply to online communities, that come from me.
Oh yeah, great question. Yeah. Oh, that sounds fantastic. So Discord, I'm going to have to check that out. Yeah, that's great. I love that you're combining a task with a discussion, and the group is quite big. So it seems to have a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
you.
great. Thank you.
So Joe, if I may hijack the last question.
Yeah.
So I was really fascinated by the two slides where the educator put on the teacher's hat as opposed to the advisor's hat, and the very different approaches. And you also mentioned about the, it's not always possible to have advisors stationed in universities because of budget. So I'm thinking from the perspective of a language teacher, or even for us researchers who are, for example, supervising students. And I was thinking about this as an excellent platform for advising of some sort. So what advice would you give us, like for maybe as supervisors or teachers, like the first step to becoming an advisor? I mean, apart from taking the course that you mentioned earlier, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Actually, some of our teachers have been taking the course, and I think they feel like they've transformed their teaching. They have a totally different approach. Because, as educators, you sort of want to help, of course, and the natural thing is to give people you want to find a solution, tell them about a textbook that really works, or a resource. And, as we saw in just a really simple example, that takes away the students' ownership and the, in sort of the ability to reflect, or to opportunities to reflect deeply and choose something that might be more appropriate to them. So how do you change the mindset of a teacher, I suppose? I don't know, apart from taking a course or having some workshops and just trying it. I've done some workshops where teachers are a bit skeptical, and it's fair enough. And then I have them try a couple of activities, usually just funny ones, just sharing something about themselves. And then one of them is the role of the advisor, and then reflecting on how that felt, how it felt to be in the advisee situation, and how nice it was that someone was really listening to you and really cared about what you said. And that experience is quite powerful and often changes minds straight away. And so then people try to do that with their own learners, even just simply just being a bit more careful about listening, rather than just filling the silence. Yeah, so maybe experiencing the advisee side in a sort of workshop works quite well. This book that I mentioned earlier that I wrote with Satoko Kato. I mean, most of those ideas for teacher training, there's some in here. They're all Satoko. She's fantastic. So she was a real pro at teacher development. So all my ideas have come from her. Basically, we've just sort of refined them over the years. But this is really practical. It has things that you could do in a workshop, or things, and there's lots of dialogues, sample dialogues, so people can sort of notice what's happening and reflect on how they might do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
So yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I mean, we all learned a lot, obviously, looking at another facet of language learning and teaching, the more socio-emotional, relational aspects of language teaching. Joe has kindly agreed that the recording could be disseminated later on our center's website, and you also saw Joe's link to her PowerPoint slides. And also Joe's email if you would like to get in touch. Thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time and for giving such a wonderful presentation. Before we go, can I hand over to our center director, Ashlyn, to just wrap up and maybe, thank you, Ashlyn. Thanks.
Yes, excuse me, sorry. Yes, just to say thank you very much to Professor Mynard for a wonderful talk, and thank you very much to Dr. Simon Chung for organising and facilitating such a wonderful event. And very, very many thanks. Again, just to reiterate, so thank you. The recording will be available, and we'll make sure that those who are present or who had to leave a bit early can attend, can access the video. And also thank you very much, Joe, for the link to the slides as well. That's wonderful. Also some some attendees have asked about a certificate of attendance, and we're very happy to do that, and we can get that out to you in due course as well. So thank you very much. Stay in contact with us for our upcoming events, which we hope to be able to bring to you shortly. And I think that's pretty much it. Sing Wang, do you have anything to add, or any other colleagues who want to add anything? Mel or anyone? Sorry, Sing Wang, you're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, I just typed our center's Twitter handle in the chat, so in case you want to give us a follow with upcoming events or other language research related issues. Yeah.
Fantastic! What a great group of people you are, and doing these events and sharing them with us. Thank you. It's fantastic.
Thank you. All right. So thank you so much, Joe. In this case, we'll call it a day for this seminar. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's keep in touch and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.